and agrees that a bill like this is important, and they are going to support it, and I think that's a great thing, Mr Speaker, and I do too.
Well said, Andrew.
Order. I'm calling Barry Coates.
Is that this?
Tēnā koe te mangai. I am rising to take a call on the bill, on 3 bills on regulatory systems, and I want to concentrate on the Bill on Regulatory Systems Commercial Matters Amendment Bill. This bill is comprised of 16 acts, and as the preface says, one of the reasons to amend these 16 acts is to fix mistakes and inconsistencies from previous bills. It does seem to me, as a new Member of Parliament, that we spend an inordinate amount of time fixing mistakes from the previous bill. The Green Party broadly supports this bill, and we support it because there are elements in the bill that we believe will reduce compliance costs for small business. The Green Party supports smart regulation that reduces compliance costs, especially on SMEs. We support regulation that is relevant and accurate, fit for purpose, and effective in promoting the public interest above all. In the consideration of this bill, I wanted to focus on a couple of clauses in particular. And the first clauses 93 to 94. That's the clauses that relate to financial markets, brackets, registration and dispute settlement, close brackets, Act of 2008. Now, the Minister has stated that these provisions, this clause, is about ensuring integrity of the Register of Financial Service Providers. Now, I don't think for a minute that the amendments in this bill will do that. The amendments in the bill will basically allow the disqualification of companies that do not have a dispute settlement process. However, there are far deeper and more pervasive problems with the Register of Financial Service Providers. The Financial Markets Authority has received 340 complaints in the form of misconduct reports emanating from 83 different countries about companies, financial service providers, that are registered under the New Zealand scheme. And the pattern is this, that dodgy companies overseas are able to lend credibility to their dodgy operations by saying, it's okay, we're a member of the New Zealand Register of Financial Service Providers. And what does registration mean under that provision? Absolutely nothing. And what kind of compliance measures are there for companies that would want to continue their membership of this register? Absolutely nothing. So what we have is companies around the world that are undertaking dodgy practices, using lent credibility from New Zealand's reputation. Now, we've had far too much of that in our financial sector. We've had the Panama Papers and the widespread perception that New Zealand has been a tax haven. We've had the delay in implementing anti-money laundering provisions that only today are likely to come to the House, despite calls for that to happen a very long time ago. And, by the way, removal of New Zealand from the EU's whitelist of approved countries in terms of financial probity. So we have a pattern here. We have a pattern that liberalisation of our financial services sector has allowed a credibility to be given to dodgy companies that act in the name of being a New Zealand financial service provider on the New Zealand Register. So we think that including just the power to deregister a financial service provider where they're not a member of a dispute settlement panel, as provided under this bill, is grossly inadequate to the task of actually restoring our integrity and our reputation internationally. It also gets worse. IMBI has put out a consultation paper on this very issue, belatedly, but unfortunately, IMBI is not proposing in their consultation paper to put the disclosure requirements and transparency into legislation. They're proposing to have the power of that through regulation. And from our perspective, that is insufficient. There are deep concerns over the integrity of our financial service provision, and that needs to be enacted in the form of legislation. It won't build confidence, including in the issue of commissions for financial advisors and insurance advisors in particular over the sale of insurance. So, Mr. Speaker, we do support this Act. We have concerns that the Register of Financial Service Providers does not go nearly far enough. However, there are other things that we support in this bill. We broadly support a number of the provisions that will help small companies. We support the flexibility around financial statements, the alignment of small branches of overseas companies with small subsidiaries that have revenues of under 10 million New Zealand dollars, and that they no longer would require an audit to be undertaken for their New Zealand operations. They will, however, still have to prepare financial statements. We also applaud the flexibility for friendly societies and credit unions, and in particular we support amending the New Zealand Superannuation and Retirement Income Act to provide education to the public about financial decisions and in helping build financial capability. We think that's a really important role of the Commissioner. There are also levies under the Commerce Act that will support the work of the Commerce Commission. So there are a number of these changes that we do support. There is one other that I would like to name in particular, the provisions to allow netting, which has to do with keeping up with international best practice, and particularly the reforms of derivative markets. If I could just conclude with a note on one other important part of this legislation. It's the Construction Contracts Act 2015. We support implementation of the amendment to this Act that, as previous speakers have said, protects the bonds of subcontractors. And we recognise that the implementation of this provision that the Green Party has supported all the way along to protect subcontractors from people running off with their bond money, we applaud the fact that there is flexibility in the form in which that bond can be held. We pressed in the committee for that to be an absolutely credible form of financial instrument that has integrity and was not subject to high risk. And we are pleased that the bonds can be held only in a narrow class of highly regulated financial instrument, which should provide that integrity while improving the flexibility and also allowing some subcontractors recourse to a third party. So these changes are welcome. We support the overall legislation. We look forward to the government taking forward many of the provisions that are not in this legislation, and particularly those that relate to restoring the integrity of New Zealand's reputation for financial services and our reputation for being a country that doesn't tolerate corruption. We have been lucky enough on one measure to be ranked highly in the world in terms of integrity and anti-corruption measures. looking at the methodology of the study, I'm not sure that we deserve it, but we need to not take this lightly and ensure that our reputation is maintained. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
I call Fletcher Tabato.
Thank you, Mr.